Welcome. My name is Maureen Cathey. I'm one of the career coaches in the Walker College of Business, Business Career Services office. And our workshop this evening is a part of our professional development series on virtual interview preparation. And this is a great topic, no matter where you are in your path. It might be that you're preparing for a full-time interview that's coming up as you're approaching graduation. It may be prepping for internship interviews. Maybe you're just trying to get some of that practice and thoughts about this in now. Or it may be that you're going to be attending our Walker Business Connections, and hopefully we'll be maybe having some interviews that happen after that event. So I'm glad that you are here. I hope that we'll be able to answer some questions related to general interviewing kind of topics, because really any interview has some basics that go along with it. So we'll kind of cover some of those first. And then we'll also go into some specifics related to virtual interviewing and some things that you might want to consider and think about there. So again, welcome, and let us know in the chat if you do have any questions as we go through the presentation. All right. So preparation really is the key. So kudos to you for being here right now, because that is part of your preparation, is learning a little bit more about this. And so that's part of the key to success. So just by watching this presentation, you're already making yourself a stronger interviewer. I can't really stress enough that preparation is key in really any of the things that you're going to be doing on your professional journey. You want to invest some time into this so that you feel more confident and comfortable when you are speaking with recruiters and talent acquisition people as a part of an interview process. You also want to be sure that you are conveying the message that you want to send. You have the power in an interview to say what it is that you want to say about yourself and convey that message. And so a little bit of preparation will help you in order to be able to do that really efficiently and effectively. All right, so first we're going to talk a little bit about doing your research, and this is on a few different levels. So first, researching yourself. And that sounds a little bit funny maybe to say, because you know who you are, but we often don't take time to think about maybe our strengths, think about those strong skills and the things that make us unique that we want to brand ourselves as and to present in front of an interviewer. So you want to spend some time reflecting on a summary of your qualifications, your skills, your strengths. Think about how you'll meet the needs of the organization that you're interviewing with. If there is a particular job description that you have read over for this interview, you want to make sure that you're matching up and thinking about what skills you bring that they've asked for, and being sure that you're letting them know that in the interview. So how you're going to add value to the organization, the skills and your strengths are something that you want to have thought about ahead of time, so that again, you have the power in the interview to make sure that you talk about those things before you're finished. You also want to research the position itself, making sure you have a really clear understanding of the role based on the information that you can gather. So whether that be the job description, if you've had a chance to talk to someone at a career fair to learn a little bit more about a role, or some other way that you have of networking and getting some information about that particular role, that's going to help you to really correlate your skills to the needs of the position. So really important to think about the position itself and doing a little bit of research there. You also want to research the employer. So they may say in one of the interview questions, what do you know about us? Or why are you interested in us? Why do you want to work for us? And that's one of the biggest mistakes we hear from recruiters, is when people really can't answer that question. So you want to make sure that you know something about that employer, both that benefits you, but you can also convey that through the way you're answering questions, and you'll be prepared for that question about kind of why you want them or why you want to be there. Really important to make them feel that you value who they are and that this is where you really want to be. And then you also want to be sure that you're researching the industry. So not only the employer themselves, but whatever industry it is. And we have all kinds of different majors on here, people who are interested in all different industries and areas. But you want to know something a little bit about your industry, so that maybe if they ask a question related to that industry, that field, you're more prepared for it. If they talk about if you want to talk about how they're positioned within the industry, and again, why that makes you interested in them in particular, that's going to really help you out. So those two pieces of researching the employer and researching the industry are important. And some people ask, well, how do I go about doing that? What are the best ways to research the employer themselves. I think you can show your interest by knowing something about maybe the CEO, the history of the organization, obviously what products or services they provide, the competitors, recent news, and what they maybe have been in, social media kind of posts. So the way you do that is you look on their website, you look at social media posts, you look at the news, you Google them, you find out all that you can, beyond just the very basics that you might already know going in. And that's going to really highlight kind of your interest. And then the industry as a whole, same type of thing. You have a broader sense of the landscape if you know a little bit more about that. You're probably gaining that somewhat from your classes, but also you can do some research in that same way, online through websites, through resources that you Google. So then beyond the research, we want to, sorry, doing a little bit of skipping around here. There we go. We want to prepare our stories. So this is going to be true no matter whether it's a virtual interview, an in-person interview, a telephone interview. No matter what it is, you're there to tell them something about you, again, and your skills and how you match up with what they're looking for. One of the main ways that they're going to do this usually is through behavioral questions. You don't necessarily need to know that it's a behavioral question when they ask it, but a lot of times those are the questions like, tell me about a time when you have. If it starts out that way, it's probably a behavioral question. And what that means is that you're going to need to have a story, something that you can talk about that demonstrates that experience, that skill set. So ahead of time, you want to have thought about stories, because if you go in cold to an interview, even though we know ourselves, even though we know the experiences that we've had, when you're put on the spot like that to think of something, sometimes those stories just don't flow into your mind. So a really good idea is to think ahead of time about some stories and experiences that you can present to answer any of those types of questions. You want to draw on different types of experiences. So maybe think about some stories that relate to your educational experience, maybe within the classroom, stories related to an internship that you've done, stories related to leadership or volunteer experience, organizational experience, all those types of jobs, part-time jobs that you've had. All those different arenas should give you some stories that you can tell, so that you're not always drawing from the same source. But these can then be stories, what types of stories am I talking about? You can think about times when you feel like, hey, that was really a successful experience. So why was it successful? What are the skills that you use to make it successful? Think about some times when maybe you've had some failures or some experiences that wouldn't rank up there on the scale of success, because again, you learned from those, and mistakes or failures, if you will. It also would be some of the types of questions they might ask would lead right into those types of stories. So if you have stories about your successes and your challenges, think about stories that are group related. Obviously, collaboration and teamwork and how you work in teams is something that most employers are trying to get at and find out about you. So have some stories that relate to your work on a team. And of course, those leadership examples. With these stories, then, you want to be able to present those stories in a way that is succinct and gets the point across for the message you're trying to convey. So we recommend the STAR method, or the PAR method is another way to think about this. So a STAR is going to be the situation, task, actions, and results. That's where STAR comes in. The process, actions, and results are that PAR method, so same type of thing. But this will help to give your stories a beginning, a middle, an end, and it'll keep you on track. So if you think about it this way as well, that's going to give you kind of the setup. They need a little bit of setup to know, so we don't just jump right into the middle of the project. What was that project? Why was it going on? And then the actions that were taken. With this one, remember that even if you're talking about a group project, the actions that you want to talk about can include those group actions as a whole, but should also focus on your role within the group and the actions that you took. And then the R, the results, is often the part that people kind of leave off or forget. Whether those results be the results of the project itself, was it a success? Did you raise the $500 for the that you set out to raise? What were the results? Sometimes the results were skills that you gained, lessons that you learned, maybe with some of those more challenging experience examples or those failures. It's going to be about what you learned or what you then did different the next time or plan to do different if you're in that situation again. So that method will really kind of help you to showcase those stories in the best light and not go on, but also give them enough information that they understand what you're talking about. Show and tell. So the show and tell method really refers to the fact that you just don't want to say, here are my skills, and use words, a list of words, because anybody can do that. You want to really demonstrate how you use those skills. So whether it be through these stories, examples that you can give, when they ask about a skill set and you list that out, even if they said, what are your 3 greatest strengths? You wouldn't want to just list those. You would want to list one and then give a brief example or reason why you would say that that's a strength. So again, that's not just the telling, but that's the showing and telling. You want to demonstrate your skills as much as possible and how they add value to the organization. And that demonstration is going to happen usually through examples of past experiences that you've had. That's kind of how we can let them know that we have these skill sets that we are then going to transfer to using in the role that we are trying to achieve. Story statement. So story statement is another thing to kind of think about preparing ahead of time or thinking about in advance. It's not that you needed to have a rehearsed and memorized answer, but you do want to think about this and have practiced in your head a little bit of the types of information you want to include. A story statement is often something that you can use to answer the question, tell me a little bit about yourself, which feels like a really easy opener that most recruiters use, but it can be kind of challenging because what part of myself do you want me to talk about? I've got a whole life history here. So you have to narrow that down and you have to focus it on, again, your message and the branding of yourself that you're trying to convey of those skill sets. So thinking in advance about the tell me about yourself or why are you here today question will really be a key. And so that story statement is a way to showcase kind of your unique skills. It can be a hook. So hopefully when you think about a story statement that would kind of tell a little bit of your story and say something about you, what is it that's maybe unique about you, or what is exciting that you can use as that hook? Because that's going to be important as well. It also allows you to start incorporating those strengths that you're wanting to convey throughout that interview, because we've done our research on ourselves. We know those strengths that we want to be sure to talk about. This is a good way to start getting some of those in. You don't want to just restate your resume in a story statement. They have your resume, or they can have that resume. That's just like that flat piece of paper. So while you're conveying those skills, you're going to give them more information about who you are, and you're rounding out that story. One way to think about a story statement or answering that tell me about yourself question is thinking about it also from the aspect of like an elevator pitch, a personal commercial. If you were going to network and introduce yourself to someone in just a short period of time, what kinds of things would you say there? In this answer, maybe about tell me about yourself, you could go a little bit longer than maybe a 30-second introduction that you might usually use as you're just introducing and networking, but it can kind of follow those same lines. Oftentimes I'll tell people, if you're really struggling to think of this, give them a little information about who you are now, where you've been, and where you're going. And if you use kind of those questions in your head, that can sometimes help with a framework to create a story statement and to be able to answer those questions. All right. So we now want to get into practicing, because you wouldn't do most anything without a little bit of practice, hopefully. Sometimes we have to get thrown into things. But if you are a musician, an athlete, a performer in any way, if you're taking tests and exams, you generally want to practice before you go into the real deal. And what I find is that many people don't really take the time to practice interviewing, even though this can be a pretty important thing to get that position that you're wanting to get, whether that's an internship or a full-time position. So I highly recommend, in addition to learning about how to interview, that you do some practicing. So we've got some great opportunities to do this. Obviously, you can do some practice on your own. One great thing is now we're all using Zoom and some of these technologies. You can video yourself and, with that, or with your, just the camera on your phone. Do a short video, or at least do it in front of the mirror so that you can see yourself and you can see if there are maybe some habits that you have that you want to try and work on. I wouldn't worry too much about it, but you want to know kind of how you're presenting yourself. And if there are some changes that you need to make, if you can get some recommendations from some people, if you're feeling like there's something that you're noticing, if you do a video practice yourself. You do want to make sure that when you do that, it isn't like a scripted, here's exactly what they're going to ask and I'm going to say, because you don't know what they're going to ask and exactly what you're going to say. Again, it just comes down to if you have that research and knowledge and stories that you're going to share, you're going to be able to answer those questions and you don't have to worry about it being scripted answers. Even with that, tell me about yourself, while I would say have some pretty good outline of what you want to say and maybe some different versions of it. If you get too memorizing and scripted in that, and something gets you off a track, then you kind of have lost all thoughts, even though you're talking about yourself and who you are. So don't worry about it being scripted or memorized, just being practiced. Some of the other tools that you can use, we have access to a tool called Big Interview, and you see that there on the screen. You can access that through appstate.biginterview.com. And that is a tool where you just have your camera and your microphone and put in some information about maybe the type of position that you're interviewing for. And you can do a practice interview that then is recorded. You can see yourself again, so that's another good way to do that. And you can actually receive some feedback on how you've done in that interview. There's even ones that are specifically designed for if you are going to be experiencing an asynchronous virtual interview, which we'll talk about what that means. But if you're going to be doing one of those, there's even opportunities to kind of practice that through a Big Interview. Another way to practice is through a mock interview or a practice interview. And while you can do this anytime by scheduling an appointment with your career coach, or maybe reaching out to a faculty member, a mentor, someone like that that you would like to get some feedback from, that we also have a great opportunity coming up for mock interviews. So with Walker Business Connections, that's happening, the week is happening September 29th or 30th and October 1st, and then the fair itself is October 2nd. So on the 30th of this month and the 1st of October, there are a lot of workshops that you can attend, but another opportunity is our mock interviews. A lot of employers are spending their time just to give to you, to give some of that feedback. And we have over 135 interview slots that are available. So lots of opportunities, lots of different times, lots of different organizations. If you go to the Business Career Services website and the Virtual Career Week information, you'll see which employers are going to be participating in those virtual mock interviews and kind of the time frames. And then you go into Handshake and you can search for the Walker College of Business mock interviews and find those companies and kind of submit a resume and sign up for a time. It doesn't have to be a company that you think, oh, I definitely want to work for them. Great. If there is one that you're really interested in, try and do a mock interview with them, because it could be a great networking opportunity and an in. But even if there's no one there that you are interested in doing an internship or a full-time position with, you're still going to get some great experience from an actual recruiter who does this all the time. So great opportunity to do that practice with a mock interview. All right. So obviously we want to make a really good first impression when we're interviewing, because that is what the whole kind of interview is most of the time, is a first impression. Studies kind of show us that it only takes about 7 seconds, which is really quick, for someone to establish a first impression of you, and you want that impression to be positive. You want it to be that you're intelligent and personable, positive, confident, upbeat. So how are you going to convey that, especially if you're thinking about doing this virtually? Because it can be a little bit more challenging doing that virtually. Think about the same things that you would think about in person, but you may have to turn up the volume on that a little bit. So think about your smile, think about your eye contact, your tone of voice. We'll talk about some of these things a little bit more detail in a few slides. But if you're thinking about all those things, you may need to turn up the volume just slightly on this, not to an extreme that makes it awkward. But in a video situation, it may be harder for someone to read that body language. Some of that may not come through quite as well. So if you know you're someone who's a little bit more reserved in some of those things, you shouldn't change who you are by any means. But again, just think about it as turning up the volume ever so slightly on those types of attributes, and that will come through a little bit more, especially in that virtual interview situation. So we're going to make that really good first impression, so that we can move on and give them lots of good information throughout the interview. All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about some types of interviews and that you may experience, or that you may have already experienced. It's great too if any of you have already been doing some interviewing and you have some specific thoughts to either share with everyone. You can put that in the chat, or questions that come up from your experiences. So the types of interviews I wanted to talk about this evening are behavioral, is kind of the most common, and then technical. There are other types of interviews, but this tends to be where most of your questions will kind of fall under the behavioral category or the technical category. So as I mentioned kind of towards the beginning, a behavioral question often starts out, tell me about a time when, or can you give me an example of a time when? And this is your opportunity to use those stories that you have thought about it. You kind of think about it as that you have a little toolkit, a virtual toolkit in your head that you're carrying around with these stories that can then be used no matter what behavioral question is asked. So you might have a story about a group experience that you did to raise money for a philanthropy. That story or experience could be used to answer a variety of questions. They may ask about, tell me about a time when you've worked with a group to achieve a project. Well, they're achieve a goal. There's that right there. You could use that example. You could also use it if it was, tell me about a time when you have achieved or exceeded a goal. Maybe with that example, that's what happened. Or if it was an example maybe of where you didn't achieve that goal, it could be used when they ask about a time when maybe something wasn't quite as successful as you would have liked it to have been. So you can see that one story could answer multiple types of behavioral questions that they might throw at you. So that should give you some confidence that it's not going to be that you're going to get all these questions that you don't have any idea how to answer. If you have those stories in mind, you will be able to answer those questions that they put in front of you. Now, as I said earlier, you do want to have multiple examples and stories in that toolkit, because you don't want to use the same example for every question that they ask, even though it could answer multiple things. We're going to use that STAR method, that PAR method, all those things we already talked about were related to those behavioral questions. And then the technical questions are something that you may get in an interview. I don't want to scare anyone with this, because oftentimes it's much more of a behavioral interview, a conversation to get to know you, get to know something about your personality and your skill sets, your transferable skills overall. But depending on your field of study, depending on the type of job that you're interviewing for, there may be some technical questions that come up in an interview. Oftentimes this doesn't happen so much in a screening interview or a first interview. It may be as you get a little bit more advanced in a process of interviewing. But again, they may give you a technical question related to your field. Don't overthink these things. Just do your best at answering that and giving maybe the reason why you would take that approach. That's really more what they're looking for, is that you can answer it with something rather than it being a right answer. They may ask you also to solve a problem, complete a puzzle, solve a coding issue in the language that's required for the position, if it's something more on that data analytics CIS side. Those are some of the types of technical questions you might get. They might even ask you to solve a problem or complete a puzzle, like how many, lawnmowers would you think are in the United States? That seems like a really far-fetched question for somebody to answer, but what they're looking for there is not an answer, a right answer. They're looking for a logical thought process to get to some sort of answer. So you would want to take a moment to think about that, but then, you would do it based on, well, I know that there are X amount of people, 300 million people, or billion people in the United States. If the household is about this many people, that would be how many households might have a lawnmower. Then you kind of take out kind of a part, so whatever your logic is for how you're going to get to that number is what you want to express to them. So that might be a technical question that's a little bit more broad and not so specific to accounting or CIS or a particular field. All right. So then the types of interviews also relate to the medium. So in-person, telephone, virtual, or digital, which a lot of things right now, of course, are that and go into that virtual and digital area. So in-person obviously is pretty apparent what that is. Right now, a lot of people are not doing in-person interviews, but you will find that there are some organizations, particularly if you get maybe a couple steps into the process, that feel that they do need to talk with you in person before they can make an offer. So just be aware of that. I also would say they'll work with an organization. If you're not comfortable with that, if there is some other way that that can be arranged, ask for that and see what they say. But right now, again, many of our in-person interviews are not taking place. The background is the same in terms of your preparation and in terms of the types of questions that you'll get, but again, some of those kind of medium technical pieces are a little bit different. A telephone interview might be something that you get. Again, sometimes it's a screening interview, so usually they're short, 20-minute to 30-minute telephone interviews. Again, this is a place where you don't get as much to express your body language. They don't get to see you smile. They don't get to see those things. So you, again, may have to over-exaggerate a little bit. Don't forget to smile, even though you're talking on the phone, because that will come across in your voice tone and inflection. So those are the things I think about with telephone. With telephone, you can have some notes in front of you because they can't see you, but don't over-rely on those notes. Just have it be something that are little tidbits that can help you remember something that you wanted to talk about. And then, of course, virtual and digital, which is why everyone's here, thinking about those types of interviews, kind of where we're going to move into. So within a virtual or digital interview, there are generally kind of 2 to 3 types. Synchronous, which would be kind of like we're doing here for all of you that are in our Zoom room together. You can see my face, I could see yours. That's kind of, it's happening at the same time. So that's the synchronous kind of interview. And that might be something that is set up and you would know in advance that you're going to be doing a synchronous interview with either one or more people. An asynchronous interview kind of falls into 2 categories. One would again be sort of a screening asynchronous interview where they're going to give you some questions that they want you to answer and give you a chance to record that and then provide that interview to them, that information to them. And then there's going kind of another step with that are AI interviews. So with AI interviews, those are going to be ones that are going to be first screened not by a person, but through the algorithms and the bots that are looking for certain pieces of information, evaluating things about that interview to maybe screen some people out before that next step in the process happens. You'll usually be told or know ahead of time kind of which type of virtual or digital interview you are going into, but just wanted you to be aware that there are multiple kinds, and so we're going to talk a little bit more about how you can really work to make the best of those situations. So, as we said, the preparation is really the same for virtual or digital interviews as in person. You still want to, have those stories ready, know what you want to say about yourself, know kind of what your brand is that you're trying and message you're trying to convey in that interview. But the nuances that are a little bit different in how, again, that medium happens. And so that's what we're going to spend a little bit of time on now. So why are employers using virtual interviews? And I want to mention this, even though that seems really obvious right now, it's because of COVID and the situation that we're in. But actually, interviewers have been using virtual interviews more readily and steadily even before we were in COVID. And I believe that they will continue to find benefits and use these virtual and digital interviews even after we're out of a situation where it feels more mandatory to do it or needed. A 2017 Deloitte report found that 33% of survey respondents already used some form of AI in their hiring process in order to save time, money, try to reduce human bias. By now, that percentage has probably even gone up. We can argue about whether or not some of these AI interviews actually do reduce bias or not, because they're still programmed by humans. But that is some of the reason why companies and interviewers are using virtual and digital interviews in addition to COVID. Time, it can really increase the recruitment process. Although I will tell you right now in COVID, things kind of have been on a little bit slower track, most people are finding, just because there's sometimes reduced staff and different things they have to take into consideration. But in general, virtual interviews will speed up that process. There's a cost savings for employers. They don't have to travel to a university or have you travel to their location. So that saves on things. They can also use less recruiters, saves on salaries. They can have a broader reach, which is great for us. I think at Appalachian State, we are not really on the path, you have to want to come to Boone, which people do, but you have to want to do that. And so sometimes there may be some organizations that don't make that effort to come here to recruit or think about Appalachian State. Well, if you're using virtual, that distance or that access doesn't really apply anymore. And so employers can reach a larger audience. That can usually means a more diverse candidate pool for them, a stronger candidate pool for them. So that's another reason why I think we'll continue to see virtual interviews being used even into the future. Consistency, they can use, if they're using AI, they can be kind of consistent in that screening process. And also some buy-in. You might find right now with virtual interviews that you're not just interviewing with a talent acquisition person or a recruiter, but they're also pulling in the person who would be your manager, or they're maybe even pulling in someone at an upper level of management in that organization because they can, because you're all available right there through Zoom or whatever medium that they're using, so platform that they're using. So you may get additional buy-in from people that are kind of on your side and in your court to champion for you if they feel like you fit their needs as a manager, but also be aware of that it's kind of a different thing, and that you might be interviewing with some people that aren't just the recruiters and the talent acquisition people. All right. So how should we prepare for these virtual interviews related mostly to the platforms and the technology? You do want to think about that technology and find out what platform you're going to be using. Of course, we use on campus a lot of Zoom, but not all organizations and companies will use Zoom. Some are not even allowed to use Zoom. I know government organizations are not using Zoom as a platform. So some of them have their own platforms. Of course, there's Google Meets, there's GoToMeetings. So there's different ways that you might be asked to interact through different technology platforms. So if at all possible, if you aren't familiar with that platform and you find out what it is that they're going to be using, if you can, just do a quick Google search and see if there's a YouTube video about that particular platform. If you can do a kind of test run at all, that would be ideal. You're not always going to know, and you're not always going to have that information, but the more you can know about that technology, the less that gets in the way, and you can concentrate on the message that you're trying to send. You want to think about your environment when you're doing either this asynchronous or synchronous virtual interview. And we're going to have a quick video that has some great tips on that. But you, of course, want to think about your surroundings, the volume that you need to have in terms of the noise levels that are around you. Can you control that? You want to think about what they're going to be seeing in that background. All those kinds of things that are important to think about. It may seem silly to mention for some of us. You may always be conscious of that. Others aren't conscious that would be something that they want to take into consideration. So thinking about your environment, of course, dressing for success. Just as in a normal in-person interview, we want you to think about what is going to be the best way to present yourself with that first impression as well as you possibly can. Now, a benefit is you might be able to just do that from the top up. You might not have to go full suit. At the same time, I would hate for anyone to run the risk of something happening and you having to get up in the middle of that interview and not being properly prepared on that lower half. But you do want to think about dressing for success. It's still important that you show some professionalism, and you often think better and feel a little bit stronger in certain types of dress. So, keep that in mind, what's going to be kind of your power suit or power clothing for a virtual interview. Again, test run if you can. If you have that actual platform you can do a test run on. Even if you don't have that platform, just make sure that you do a little bit of testing, maybe of your microphone, your camera, have a friend that you connect with just to make sure that your environment looks good, that the read of everything that you think is happening is the same thing that they're getting on the other side. So definitely if you can do a test run, that's going to be ideal. All right. So now we are gonna, this is where we have a little video. It's a short video. It actually was created related to Skype. So it's a little bit older, but it has awesome, great information in it. And so this is where hopefully the volume will come through okay for you all. Gracie, just let me know if it doesn't, and we can go a different route with this.
So you're going to be interviewed over Skype, and you want to look better than this. Well, here are 4 easy keys you can apply to look good in Skype interviews. Key 1, sound. Having good sound is just as important as having good video. An empty room like this might sound fine to you in normal conversation, but it creates an annoying echo for anyone listening on video, especially if the floor isn't carpeted. Basically, the more stuff that's in the room to deflect the sound, the less echo. And make sure there's no loud noises in the background. Loud office conversations, construction, and air conditioning, these will make your interview painful to listen to. Key 2, location. Create a good background. This one is not good. It makes me look like a total sloth. This one is too distracting. What's that guy doing back there? In this one, just make sure you don't have anything embarrassing in the background. Keep it neat and simple. A white wall is usually too plain, so I set up a bookshelf like this. You can also use a house plant, a lampshade, a piece of art, etc. If you're at the office, you can set up a clean desk with a computer in the background. Now you're probably using a laptop with a built-in camera or a webcam like this. Notice how the camera is actually several inches below my eyes. So when you're looking through the camera, if you angle it at your face, it shows the ceiling. So you want to stack it up on a box like this. Basically, you want the camera at eye level because this is the way people are used to seeing you. And you want to be a little more than arm's length from the camera. So you're about this size in the frame. And you want your eyes to be about 2/3 of the way to the top. Key 3, lighting. Good lighting makes a huge difference. Professional lighting uses 4 light sources, but you really only need 1. If it's daytime, you can just use a window. If it's too bright, pull the shades. You need the window to be pretty much in front of you, not to the side or behind. Wow, I think I found the worst interview setup ever. If it's nighttime and there's no window nearby, grab a lamp. Don't use overhead lighting like this. It makes you look terrible. And definitely don't light yourself from below, unless you're telling scary campfire stories. What you want is a lamp in front of you, like this one, with the light slightly above the height of your eyes while you're sitting down. Of course, this one is great because I can adjust the levels, but pretty much any lamp will do. If it's too bright, try moving it back. If it's too dim, just move it a little closer. Key 4, you. Now that everything else is set up, make sure you look good. Dress appropriately, at least on top. You might want to wear makeup. Yeah, even some men do it. And don't look down at the computer screen while being interviewed. Look directly at the camera. Now, this might feel a little weird to you at first, but to the people watching, it looks like you're looking directly at them, which is good. And try not to move too much. Even just a few inches back and forth can be really distracting. So to recap, find a quiet place without distracting sounds. Set up a good background. Set your camera at eye level, arm's length away. Make sure you have good lighting, and make sure you look good. Now I've put all this into a checklist for you, and you can find it in the link below the video. That's it. Good night and good luck.
All right. So I hope that that gave you a few good tips to use. We're going to go back to our PowerPoint here. All right. So hopefully we are back with our PowerPoint slides. Let's move on to this next one. All right. So again, the types of things he mentioned all might seem pretty obvious, especially since we've been in the Zoom world now. Many of you may have already, tried to take some of those things to heart. We don't always have, though, the greatest setups when we just are needing to get to class on Zoom or something like that. Obviously, it's something that you want to make a little bit more of an effort for and take into consideration when you're doing an actual interview. So if you can take at least some of those steps, do what you can and what you are able to do with your resources, it's just going to put you again in a better space, better light, literally, and it will make sure that that's not a distraction in any way and that they can concentrate again on the great information that you're providing them and what you want to say. People often ask too about virtual backgrounds that you can do on some platforms like Zoom. And if you do need to do that, then go ahead and do that if you're in a space where that's just the only option so that they're not seeing what's behind you. If you can avoid it, though, I do recommend not using a virtual background when you're doing an interview, just because I'm sure you've noticed when people use virtual backgrounds, if they move, sometimes they go out, you can't see them anymore, they go out of frame. So it gets a little distracting if you have any movement sometimes with the virtual background. So just keep that in mind. It's an option, but it may not be the best option, especially if you are someone who moves a little bit more when you're speaking. All right. So I want to go into a little bit about more in depth about virtual asynchronous or AI interviews. So this would be more of a one-way interview. Instead of you being with someone at the same time, it's a one-way interview, an asynchronous interview that enables prospective employers to learn a little bit more about you, but it's in a more automated fashion. These are often conducted via a website or an internet-enabled device that uses digital interviewing applications. They can be pre-recorded, and sometimes the questions are timed. So it may be that you go onto a site and they give you those questions kind of right up front, and you could spend some time thinking about your answers. It may be that those questions pop up and then you have 3 minutes to provide an answer. So again, that's where the STAR method is going to help to make sure that you are able to get that answer across in those 3 minutes, or it might be a different time frame. But you sometimes then are able to re-record and sometimes not. So again, finding out a little bit of information ahead of time if you can, or reading the information they provide you about what the steps are for this asynchronous one-way interview is important to do, because obviously it's going to make a difference if you can have another shot at it and re-record. Just keep in mind as well that we're often harder on ourselves than we need to be, and sometimes the more you redo it, the less natural and authentic it's going to be. And you may only have so many chances to re-record. Hopefully, again, they've let you know that, you can re-record up to 3 times. But that's something to consider with those one-way asynchronous interviews. Oftentimes, these are kind of pre-interview screening questions. They're not usually going to get into technical things like those technical questions we talked about. They're really wanting to know just a little bit more broadly about you and how you fit maybe with their job description and the skills that they're looking for. So some common platforms that are used for asynchronous interviews. Some of these are, again, for those kind that are just the one-way interviews that are viewed then by a person. And some of them are going to be the AI, where the very first thing that sees those is not a person. It's going to be screened with the bots and with the algorithms that they've put into the system. So common platforms, though, are HireVue, Pymetrics, VidCruiter, My Interview is another one. Spark Hire, we've heard companies using Spark Hire, RecWrite, WePow. So if you hear any of those mentioned or get any information on those, that's what it is. It's going to be a platform that either allows you to record an interview or record an interview that then is going to be screened through AI. You won't know exactly what it's been programmed to screen for. So there's not really a way to game the system or to beat the system or things that you need to be overthinking and doing, even if you know that it is an AI interview. The thing that you need to do is to be yourself. Prepare like you would for any other interview. Make sure that you pay maybe a little bit closer attention to a few little details that we'll go over, like cadence and tone. And again, thinking about that volume and how that's going to be read through AI instead of just another human. So in regard to that, we're going to think about a few things. Whoop. Okay. So we're going to want to think about controlling our body language and our hand gestures. As the gentleman said in our little short video there, if you are bobbing around too much, that can be distracting. And especially, again, with that virtual interview or virtual background piece. So you want to be sure that you keep it a little bit under control. If you're someone, though, that uses their hands when they talk, I still am going to use my hands. The trap you get into is, where are your hands showing or not? So you may be using your hands and they're not even showing, or they may just be popping up a little bit into the screen. And so that can look maybe a little bit more awkward or be distracting. So just thinking about controlling the body language and the hand gestures that you use. You do want to make good eye contact, even though you're not actually making eye contact with another person. You want to have the good balance of eye contact and looking away. You don't need to stare into the camera 100% of the time, but you do want to look into the camera, as again was mentioned in the video. Sometimes if we're looking down at different things, maybe notes that we have, or if the screen, we've got it set up so that we're looking lower than the camera, which is at the top of the screen, then it looks like we're looking down and not looking at the person, or giving good eye contact. The AI does measure eye contact. It is one of the things that it's programmed to look for. So you want to just be sure that you're, again, try to be as natural with that as possible, even though you don't have an actual person that you are speaking to. Let's see, you want to think about maybe with those body gestures, body language, the smile in particular, as I mentioned earlier, thinking about toning it up just a little bit, over smiling just a little bit. I don't want people to go to the extreme and be like Joker smile and be smiling 100% of the time, because that would be awkward. But you do want to make sure that you are thinking about, again, toning that up just a little bit. You do want to bring your personality to the interview. So again, I don't want anybody to say, well, Maureen said I need to be a different person and smile, even though that's not me. You still probably want to smile, but you do want to be yourself and bring your personality through. But it may be that it has to come through a little bit more in that virtual space. So AI does have an ability to analyze your facial expressions. What are they looking for? Some of the things that they are looking for are whether you are being authentic and truthful in the interview. They can judge that a little bit by some of those facial expressions. Emotion, excitement, that would be one thing. So it may be that a little bit of exaggeration on your part will help, but you don't want to overdo or be unnatural. You also just want to remember that, there are different things about, if you look up to the left, that means one thing. If you're looking down, that means you're not telling the truth. You don't need to worry about, oh gosh, I looked to the left or I looked down. You just, again, want to be natural and know that if you're authentically speaking and you're telling the truth in the interview, that will ultimately come through. Even though some of them aren't admitting it, the companies that are using this, that is one of the pieces that I think I just want you to be aware of, is that they are programming some of these AI interviews to try and gauge your level of honesty and enthusiasm by your facial expressions, by your tone of voice. So again, not really a way to game it or do something special with that, just to be aware of it. You do want to focus on your cadence and your tone. You want to try not to race through every answer, even if you only have a certain amount of time to answer that question. You want to make sure that you are going at a nice pace so that the information comes across clearly and that either a person or the AI can understand what it is that you're trying to say. You do want to utilize the practice questions provided if they do that. So sometimes, whether it's recorded for someone, a human to look at, or AI, they might give you some practice questions or a chance to use the system first before they ask you to get into the real questions. Take advantage of that. Be sure that you are comfortable again with that platform. Do the same things that we've talked about in terms of preparation and then usage. So still use that STAR method or PAR method for those behavioral questions. Do think about keywords, and this again can go all the way back to the preparation. If you see in their job description that they've used the word collaborate several times, obviously collaboration is important to them. That probably means that it was either programmed into the AI or it's something that the person reviewing your interview is going to be looking for. So it doesn't mean to use it every other word, but definitely be sure that you're putting some of those keywords in there that will be important for that interviewer, that company. Again, some platforms allow you to re-record those answers. So be sure that if you feel like, okay, I'm really unhappy with the result of that answer, and you have an opportunity to re-record, then take that chance and do that re-record. Just keep in mind, again, that you know kind of what the parameters for that are if you are doing that practicing and then re-recording. I wouldn't try to go into every question thinking, okay, well, I'll do the first answer as a practice and then I'll do it for real. You may have your best answer right there at the very beginning and the very first answer, but if not, you do sometimes have that opportunity to re-record. All right, and so finally, just to wrap some things up with our interviewing, you do want to think about after the interview as well, all pieces. So we're preparing ahead of time and doing our research, things to think about during the actual interview itself, and then after the interview, or first a little bit towards the end of the interview. You do want to think about a closing statement as well as we talked about kind of that story statement or opening statement. If they give you a chance and say, is there anything else you want us to know? Or just as you're thanking them and want to wrap up, you can re-emphasize why you're so interested in this position or why you're a good match for the qualities that they're looking for. Bring out a couple of those things. If for any reason you've gone through that whole interview and not been able to convey some of the things that you wanted to, you may be able to get those a little bit into a wrap up at the end. You also want to establish next steps. Hopefully they're telling you what those next steps are, but if not, ask them, when will I expect to hear something, or what would the next step in the process be? What's the timeline? Those kinds of things. You can take notes during an interview so that you can remember a little bit about the types of questions that were asked and how you kind of respond to those. If you learn something from the interviewer about the company or the organization, it is okay. And often interviewers will tell us that they like it when you take notes because they know then that you are paying attention and are interested. So if you can do that kind of at times and moments during the interview, that's fine to do. And then use those notes afterwards to kind of review and know what you might want to do differently in another interview, or if you're interviewing with this same organization, what you've already told them, what you might want to focus on in future interviews. So then after that interview is done, you want to be sure that you thank them. Do that follow-up thank you. Usually we recommend within 48 hours that you do a follow-up email. It still needs to be a professional email, but it can be an email, and that way you can remind them of your conversation a little bit, maybe take some tidbit that you remember that you talked about, something that was maybe a connection between you and the interviewer. And again, that lets them help remember you, as well as shows your enthusiasm for the position. You're thanking them for their time. And then prepare yourself for hopefully those next steps in that interview process with that organization. But you do want to be sure that at the end, you don't just say, "Ooh, that's done," and not think about it again. You do want to process it a little bit, because that'll help you, especially if you're going to be interviewing with them again in the future. And then finally, just want to make sure that you all have the information on the resources that you have available to you. So we already talked about Big Interview. You also can make appointments to do either mock interviews or just get some additional information from your career coach. We do all that through Handshake. So appstate.joinhandshake.com. And the types of things that you can have a session about are all kinds of things that relate to your professional development. You'll see kind of the 3 career coaches there listed. We divide things up a little bit by majors. So you should automatically, when you go into Handshake, see the availability for your career coach based on your major. They do want to see you. They do want to help you. So definitely reach out. And then additional resources are available on our Business Careers Services website at businesscareers.appstate.edu. There's everything there from sample cover letters and resumes to information on interviewing to our YouTube page that has all these professional development series recorded and available to you. So lots of resources. And then, of course, I just want to put in a big plug for the page that has information about our virtual career fair and our career fair week. So again, workshops that you can attend that are done by both faculty as well as employers. So we're going to have employers that are sitting on panels, and that might be a really good networking connection to make, is to go ahead and go to their session as well. So we'll have workshops that you can attend, the mock interviews that you can take advantage of, and then the fair itself, where you get to go to group sessions and individual one-on-one sessions with those employers that you are interested in. So big plug for that. You want to do some registering and research on that ahead of time. So don't wait until October 2nd to try and do that. So now I want to stop with all my babbling on and see if there are any questions that either you want to type into the chat or I'm also fine if you want to just unmute and ask a question that may have come up either through what we talked about or just something you had hoped would be answered for you this evening.
We have a question. Did
Mhm.
you get?
No, if you can tell me, let me know what it is.
It's what are good questions to ask potential employers at the end of the interview?
That's a great question. So you definitely want to have some questions prepared that you are going to ask them. You don't want to leave this opportunity. Sometimes we again hear that that's where people falter a little bit, is they say, do you have any questions for us? And if you say no, it either sounds like you have really done your research and you know everything about them, which really isn't possible, or that you're just not interested. So you can show your enthusiasm by having questions. What I would say are some good questions to ask would be some things that show that you've done some research. So, this is where you could say, I saw on your website that one of your mission statements is to X. That really sits, resonates with me. Maybe it's about sustainability, we'll say. So if you saw on their website that they have a passion for sustainability as well, and you do, have a question prepared to ask a little bit more in depth about that. Or would I be involved in some of the activities that relate to that? So anything really that you find on their website, you can ask a more in-depth question about. That also gives you information to help you make your decisions about that employer and if that's the right place for you. You can ask maybe something that you saw in an article about them, something that's happening right now in the industry, and ask them to talk a little bit about them and their place within that kind of situation. You can also ask questions of the interviewer in terms of, what do they like best about working for ABC organization? What has their career path looked like? What are some tips that they would give someone that's in your position just starting your career in the field? So you can ask some things that are more related to the interviewer, but also give you information about whether this is an organization that you want to be a part of. You can also ask them, was there anything, or you could ask something along the lines of, what are the traits that you really hope that you're going to find in someone to fill this position? If they say a couple of things, hopefully you've already expressed that you have those skills and traits. If they say something that you hadn't talked about, but you do feel like you have an example to show them that you are a great communicator, then go ahead and say, "Oh, that's great to know. I've been able to have an opportunity to do X in my internship, which has given me some great background in that as well." So now you've not only learned a little bit more about what they're looking for, but you've been able to, again, position yourself that you have it. So that's another good type of question to ask. Only ones really to avoid are things that are information that you could have found out on your own very easily. So in other words, do you have an office in Charlotte? Probably not the time at the end of it, if you've already been through the interview with them and used their time to find out whether they have an office in Charlotte or not, when you could have found that information out online. So don't ask questions like that, and then don't ask things that are too self-serving, particularly at the beginning stages of an interview. So you don't want to sound like all you're really interested in is the salary or how many vacation days you'll get or something like that. Hopefully that answers that question that someone had, but that's a great one. Are there any other questions that we can answer as we wrap up our time here? Because I know we've used up our hour, but I want to be sure to answer anything that is out there. Well, if there's not, I will hold on for just a few more minutes myself to see if there's anybody that has something that they want to ask just a little bit more individually without everyone else. But I thank you all for joining us for this professional development series workshop. There are going to be ones going on every Tuesday evening. So please join us for future workshops. Let people know that we're able to attend, that the recording is going to be available on our website so that you have this as a resource. And I thank you very much for your time this evening.